She was trapped in the barn as it burned. The cowboy broke the door and pulled her into his arms. His sun hung high in the sky, spilling golden light across the wide fields that stretched beyond the small town of Willow Creek, Texas. The heat of early afternoon made the wooden fence posts warm to the touch, and the dust on the dirt roads rise in lazy clouds as a soft breeze passed over the land. Emily Harper wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, feeling the warmth of the sun soak through her cotton shirt. She had been working since early morning, as she did every day, tending to the farm that had been in her family for generations. The Harper farm was modest but beautiful, with sprawling pastures dotted with cows and horses, an orchard at the back of the property, and a large old barn at the center. The barn had seen better days. Its paint was peeling, the wood creaking with age, and the roof sagged slightly at one corner. But it was sturdy, and it had always been home to the animals and the equipment that kept the farm running. Emily had grown up around the barn, climbing the hay bales as a child, helping her parents repair fences, and learning the rhythm of farm life in a way that city kids could never understand. Today, she had been feeding the cows and checking on the horses. She moved quickly, pouring feed into the troughs, brushing down the animals, and making sure each one had fresh water. Her hands were calloused from years of work, but she had grown proud of them. There was satisfaction in hard work, in seeing something flourish because of your own effort, and Emily knew that better than anyone. She hummed softly to herself as she worked, the sound swallowed by the occasional clatter of hooves on the wooden floor. By late morning, Emily had finished her chores in the pastures and turned her attention to the barn. Inside, she had stacked bales of hay for the winter and moved old tools into neat piles, a process that required patience and care. The smell of hay mixed with the faint scent of horses and leather filled her senses, comforting and familiar. She paused for a moment to glance around, feeling a sense of pride in the order she had created. Everything had its place. Everything was ready. Unbeknownst to Emily, the barn was hiding a danger she couldn't see. A discarded cigarette from the previous evening had found its way into a small pile of dry hay, smoldering slowly in silence. The tiny ember, unnoticed by anyone, had begun to ignite the dried straw, a quiet threat that no one could hear over the everyday sounds of farm life. The sun outside continued its climb, heating the barn's wooden walls and adding fuel to the tiny spark that waited to grow. Across the fields, Jake Lawson worked on a fence that ran along the edge of the pasture. He was a strong, tall man in his early 30s, with sun-tanned skin and hands shaped by years of ranch work. His hair, dark and slightly wind-tousled, fell across his forehead as he bent over the posts, hammering nails with precision. Jake was known in Willow Creek for his calm nature and his ability to handle crises without panic. People often said he had the patience of a saint and the strength of a bear. Today, though, he was absorbed in the mundane task of repairing the fence, unaware of the danger growing across the field. Inside the barn, Emily moved on to the next task, checking the small storage room where old farming equipment was kept. She opened the door, letting in a thin sliver of light that illuminated cobwebs and dust particles floating in the air. The smell of mildew mixed with hay, creating a thick, earthy scent that seemed to settle into her lungs. She coughed lightly, waving her hand in front of her face to clear the dust, and reached for the old metal rake she had been meaning to clean. That was when she first noticed it, a faint wisp of smoke curling upward from the corner of the barn. Emily froze, her instincts telling her that something was wrong. The smoke was thin, almost invisible at first, but the smell of something burning reached her nose, sharp and alarming. She took a cautious step forward, trying to locate the source. Her heart began to beat faster, and a cold shiver ran down her spine. She knew that barns, with their dry hay and old wood, could catch fire quickly, but she had never seen one ignite before. As Emily approached the corner, the smoke thickened slightly. She could see the faint glow of a small flame licking the edge of the hay pile. Panic bubbled up inside her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She remembered her father's words from years ago. Fire spreads faster than you think. Don't waste time. Act or it will act for you. Emily scanned the barn, looking for anything she could use to stop the fire. The small bucket of water in the corner wouldn't help much, and there was no fire extinguisher in sight. Suddenly the flames grew taller, crackling as they consumed more of the dry hay. The heat hit Emily like a wave, making her take a step back. Her eyes watered and she coughed, but she refused to turn away. She grabbed a nearby shovel and tried to beat down the flames, hoping to smother them, but the fire was too fast. Panic clawed at her chest as she realized she couldn't control it. She ran toward the door, only to find that it had swollen in the heat and was stuck fast. She pushed with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. Her mind raced. She thought of the animals she had been caring for, the equipment that had been passed down through generations, and the memories tied to every corner of the barn. She banged on the door with her fists, shouting for help, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of the growing fire. The smoke filled her lungs, making it hard to breathe, and tears blurred her vision. Emily's heart pounded in her chest as fear and desperation took hold. Meanwhile, Jake finished hammering the last nail in the fence post and stood up, stretching his back. That was when he heard it, a faint, desperate voice calling from the direction of the barn. He froze, his ears straining. There it was again, clearer this time, a woman's voice, filled with fear. Without thinking, he sprinted across the field, his boots pounding against the dry earth. The heat from the sun was nothing compared to the urgency that propelled him forward. As he ran, he could see smoke rising into the sky, curling like dark ribbons above the barn. His stomach tightened. He had known Emily for a few years, though they weren't close. Still, the thought of anyone trapped in that fire was unbearable. Adrenaline surged through him as he reached the barn, taking in the scene. Flames licking the walls, smoke curling into the rafters, and a figure banging desperately on the stubborn door. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby wooden beam and tried to force the door open, but the wood groaned under the heat, barely moving. The smell of burning hay filled his nose, making him cough, but he forced himself to focus. He could see Emily through the smoke, her face streaked with tears and soot, her hands bruised from pounding on the door. Her fear mirrored his own. Emily's lungs burned as she tried to take deep breaths. She knew she couldn't give up, but every second that passed made the fire grow stronger and the barn weaker. She clutched the door with both hands, hoping it would somehow give way, but the heat made it almost impossible to hold on. The fire crackled around her, sending sparks into the air. Her mind raced with every possible scenario, but there was only one thought that dominated her: survival. She had to get out. Jake's hands worked feverishly, pushing, kicking, and pounding the door. His muscles strained, but he refused to give up. He shouted her name over the roar of the fire, and Emily's ears caught the sound like a lifeline. Hope sparked in her chest. She called back, her voice hoarse but determined, "I'm here, I can't get out." Jake took a deep breath, focusing all his energy on the task at hand. He knew that every second counted, that the fire was unpredictable and fast. He slammed his shoulder into the door again, and this time it gave slightly, a small crack appearing at the bottom. Emily pushed from the inside, feeling the wood shift under her hands. Together they fought against the door, against the fire, against time. The heat was intense, but so was their determination. They moved together as one, each blow and shove a testament to the will to survive. Emily could feel her strength waning, but she refused to give in to despair. She thought of her family, of the farm she loved, and of life beyond the barn. She thought of the sky outside, the fields, and the promise of safety if only she could reach it. The struggle continued, the door groaning and splintering with every attempt. Sweat poured down both their faces, mixing with soot and dust. Emily's heart raced with fear and hope in equal measure. Every second felt like a lifetime, but she knew that they couldn't stop. That stopping meant certain danger. And then, just as the fire roared louder, something shifted. The door moved more than it ever had before. Jake's strength and Emily's persistence combined, and the barrier finally gave way, a small opening that promised escape. Emily pushed with all her remaining energy, and Jake followed, ready to pull her into safety. As the first sliver of daylight touched her face through the broken door, Emily realized she was not alone. Help had arrived. Someone strong, determined, and fearless had reached her. Relief washed over her, mingled with exhaustion and fear, but a spark of hope ignited in her heart. The barn was still ablaze, but for the first time, Emily felt that survival was within reach. Smoke was everywhere now, thick and suffocating, curling through the barn like dark waves. Emily coughed violently, her chest tightening as she tried to breathe. Her hands were blackened with soot, and her hair clung to her face in damp strands. The fire crackled angrily around her, sending sparks flying into the hay and wooden beams above. She could hear the groaning of the old structure as heat warped the wood, a terrifying reminder that time was running out. Her heart pounded, each beat echoing the urgency of her situation. She thought frantically about how she had ended up here. Just hours ago, the barn had been a place of calm and routine, a place of work, but also of memories. She remembered climbing on the hay bales as a child, hiding in the loft during summer storms, and laughing with her father as they fed the animals together. Now, all of that was threatened by the flames that licked at the walls, hungry and unstoppable. Emily tried to move, but the smoke was thick, making it hard to see, harder to think. She staggered toward the corner of the barn where a window might offer a way out, only to find it nailed shut and covered with soot. Her hands shook as she tried to pull at the boards, but the heat burned her fingers, forcing her to step back. She realized with a sinking feeling that the door was her only chance, the stubborn wooden door that had swollen and locked her in. She banged on it again, screaming for help, her voice hoarse and barely audible through the roar of the fire. Fear clawed at her chest. She thought about what could happen if she didn't get out. The barn collapsing, the flames consuming her, the smoke overtaking her lungs. Panic made her heart race, but she forced herself to focus, forcing herself to think clearly. She had survived tough situations before on the farm, falling from a horse, getting stuck in muddy fields, facing storms that tore through the town, but nothing like this. Outside, Jake ran across the sun-scorched field, boots pounding against the dry dirt, his eyes locked on the smoke rising above the barn. Each step carried a mix of fear and determination. He had seen barn fires before, but never had anyone been trapped inside. The thought of Emily, someone he knew and respected, alone in that burning building, made his stomach tighten. He felt adrenaline coursing through his veins, sharpening his senses and giving him strength he didn't know he had. As he neared the barn, the heat hit him. The air shimmered with it, a wall of dry, fiery air that made his eyes water. Sparks and embers floated in the wind, some landing on the grass around him, others catching the edge of the barn roof. He could hear the roar of the fire from inside, the way the flames hungrily consumed everything in their path. And then he heard her voice again, weak, desperate, but still there. "Help, please, somebody," Emily shouted. Her voice was ragged from coughing, but it cut through the noise like a knife, giving Jake a direction and a purpose. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy wooden beam lying near the fence and ran toward the barn. He kicked and shoved at the door, his shoulders straining as the wood groaned under his strength. Sparks flew as the beam scraped against the frame, and the heat of the fire pressed against him like a physical weight. He could see Emily through the smoke, her eyes wide with fear, her hands pressed against the door, trying to push it open from inside. The fire was growing faster now, feeding on the dry hay and old wood. The smell of burning straw was intense, filling Jake's nose and making him cough, but he refused to stop. He knew he had only moments to act before the flames trapped her completely. He slammed the beam against the door again, then kicked it with all his strength, the wood splintering slightly under the force. Inside, Emily saw the small shift in the door and felt a surge of hope. She pushed with every ounce of strength she had left, her muscles burning from effort and fear. She could barely see Jake through the smoke, but she could hear him, shouting her name, calling her to stay calm, to keep fighting. His voice was a lifeline, and she clung to it like a thread of hope in the darkness. The barn shook around them. A beam overhead creaked dangerously, threatening to collapse. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, landing on the hay and causing tiny bursts of flame to flare up in random spots. Emily ducked instinctively, her hair catching fire in a moment of panic before she managed to smother it with her sleeve. She gasped, lungs burning, but refused to stop. Every second mattered. Jake could see that the door would not give easily. The heat was warping the wood, the fire pressing against it from the inside, making it almost impossible to force open. But he refused to give up. He gritted his teeth and slammed his shoulder into the door, again and again, each time feeling it give slightly under his strength. Sweat poured down his face, mingling with the soot and dust that covered him from head to toe. Emily shouted back, trying to encourage him as much as herself. "Keep going, I'm here, don't stop." Her voice trembled, but determination shone through. She could feel the door shifting more under Jake's efforts, and for the first time she allowed herself to hope. She knew that together they could make it if they could just hold on a little longer. The fire roared louder, a living creature that seemed to sense their determination. Flames licked higher, reaching for the rafters, and a section of the ceiling cracked, sending a shower of sparks down around them. Emily ducked, narrowly avoiding a small piece of burning wood. Her hands were raw from pushing the door, her arms trembling from the effort, but she refused to give up. Survival was the only thing that mattered. Jake saw the sparks fall around her and shouted, "Hold on, Emily." Almost there. His voice was firm, commanding, filled with urgency but also reassurance. He slammed his shoulder into the door again, this time with all the strength he could muster, and the wood gave slightly more. Emily pushed from inside, feeling the barrier shift under her hands. Together they were making progress, slowly but surely. The heat was intense now, searing against their skin, but neither of them could think of stopping. Emily's mind raced with memories. Her father teaching her to care for the animals, the long summer evenings she had spent in the barn with her friends, the small victories of farm life that had made her proud. All of it seemed to flash before her eyes as she fought for her life, each memory giving her the strength to keep going. Outside, Jake felt a surge of adrenaline as he saw the door finally begin to give way. He shouted, "Push!" Push, and Emily, hearing him, gave one last desperate shove. The door splintered, a large crack forming at the bottom. She could see the sunlight spilling through, a promise of safety and freedom. With a final effort, Jake kicked and pushed the door open completely, and Emily stumbled out, coughing violently, gasping for air, and barely able to stand. Jake grabbed her, pulling her away from the burning barn, shielding her from the sparks that still rained down. Her body shook from exhaustion, fear, and smoke inhalation, but she was alive. They collapsed on the grass outside, Emily clinging to Jake as he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. The roar of the fire behind them was deafening, but for the first time in what felt like hours, Emily allowed herself to breathe without fear. The smoke still stung her lungs, but she was safe. She could feel her heart slowing, her body realizing that the danger had passed, at least for now. Neighbors began arriving, drawn by the smoke and the sound of shouting. Some were already calling the fire department, while others tried to bring buckets of water or blankets to help. Jake stayed close to Emily, keeping her calm, helping her catch her breath, and ensuring she didn't collapse from exhaustion. She leaned against him, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face, grateful beyond words for his courage and quick thinking. The barn burned fiercely behind them, a blazing inferno that consumed decades of work, memories, and hard labor. Yet despite the destruction, Emily felt a sense of profound relief. She had survived. She had someone who had risked everything to save her. And even as the barn crumbled into ashes, a small spark of hope grew in her heart, the knowledge that life, even in the face of disaster, could continue. Jake looked at the barn, his jaw tight, but his mind already thinking ahead. The fire could be rebuilt. The animals were safe. Emily was safe. That was what mattered most. He turned to her, brushing soot from her hair and checking her arms and legs for injuries. She was shaken, yes, but she would recover, and together they had faced something terrifying and come through it alive. Emily sat in the grass, looking back at the flames. Her chest still heaved from fear, but a strange calm settled over her. She realized that courage wasn't just about strength, it was about hope, determination, and trusting someone when you needed them most. Jake had given her that hope, and in doing so had changed the course of her life forever. The barn was now a roaring inferno, its flames stretching high into the sky, licking the wooden beams and sending sparks flying in all directions. The heat pressed down on the ground around it, creating waves that shimmered in the afternoon sun. Emily Harper, crouched near the center of the barn, gasped for breath as smoke filled her lungs. Her eyes stung, tears streaming down her soot-covered face, but she refused to give in to panic. Every instinct in her screamed to run, to escape, but the door that had once promised freedom remained stuck fast. She looked around desperately for anything else that might help her, any small opening, any gap that could lead to safety. The windows were covered in thick dust and nailed shut. The loft above her had collapsed in part, sending a pile of burning hay tumbling to the floor. Sparks rained down around her as she ducked instinctively, clutching the charred wood railing for balance. Her heart pounded violently in her chest, and the fear that had been simmering since the first wisp of smoke now surged like a tidal wave. Emily's thoughts raced. She thought of her parents, who had entrusted her with the farm while they were away for a short trip, and of the animals she had fed just hours ago. Would they be okay? Could she save them? Panic threatened to overtake her, but she forced herself to take a deep, burning breath. Think, stay calm, find a way out. She pressed her back against the wall and tried to focus, feeling the heat creeping closer, scorching her skin through the thin cotton of her shirt. Outside, Jake Lawson had never moved so fast in his life. He sprinted across the field, boots kicking up dust, ignoring the sting of sweat in his eyes. His gaze was locked on the smoke and flames, and his mind raced with a single thought: Emily had to get out alive. He had seen farm fires before, but he had never faced one like this. The barn was old, dry, and full of fuel for the fire, and it was collapsing faster than he had anticipated. Each crack and groan of the wood set his nerves on edge. He reached the barn and immediately saw Emily through the thick smoke, her small figure barely visible, coughing and pounding at the door. His heart clenched. The flames had grown so intense that they created a wave of heat that made the ground beneath him shimmer. Sparks fell around him, some landing dangerously close to his boots, but he didn't stop. He grabbed a thick beam lying near the fence and slammed it against the stubborn door, each impact reverberating through his arms and shoulders. Emily saw him through the smoke and screamed, "Jake, hurry, I can't breathe." Her voice was hoarse and broken, but it carried through the roar of the fire. Jake shouted back, "Hold on, I'm coming." "Don't give up." His words were filled with urgency and determination, giving Emily a thread of hope to cling to. She pushed against the door one last time, feeling it move slightly under his strength. Sparks rained down around her and a small beam above her head cracked and threatened to fall. Emily ducked instinctively as the beam splintered and fell, landing just a few feet away. Her heart raced, but she refused to panic. She could feel her strength fading, her arms trembling from the repeated efforts, but she knew she couldn't give up. Survival depended on focus, on determination, and on the help that she knew was coming. She took another deep, searing breath, trying to steady herself. Jake slammed into the door again, sweat pouring down his face, mixing with soot and dust. He could see that the door was about to give way, but the heat of the fire made every movement excruciating. Flames licked the edges of the wood, making it nearly impossible to keep his grip. Yet he refused to stop. Each strike of his shoulder, each kick, brought the door closer to breaking. He could see Emily struggling, coughing, and leaning against the splintering wood. She was weak from smoke inhalation, but she was fighting to survive, and that gave him even more determination. Suddenly, a section of the roof above them groaned and cracked. The old beams threatened to collapse entirely, and the fire shot sparks downward like a cascade of golden rain. Emily flinched, her body pressed to the door, tears streaming down her face. She gasped for air, her lungs burning, and for a moment fear threatened to paralyze her. This could be it, she thought. This could be the end. Jake saw the danger above and shouted, "Emily, move back, hold on." But she could barely hear him over the roar of the fire. He took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and pushed with all the strength he had left. The door splintered under his force, and for the first time a small gap opened at the bottom. Emily grabbed the chance, pushing from inside, her body straining as she forced herself against the obstacle. The flames roared louder as if sensing their defiance. A section of the wall to her right collapsed, sending burning hay tumbling across the floor. Emily ducked, smoke choking her, sparks landing dangerously close. She could feel the heat on her face and arms, but she focused on the gap in the door. She pushed once more, her muscles screaming in protest, and felt the wood give way enough for her to squeeze through. Jake didn't hesitate. He reached inside, grabbed her arms, and pulled with all his strength. Emily gasped as she felt the cool air from outside brush against her face for the first time. The contrast with the scorching heat inside was almost overwhelming. With one final effort, he dragged her completely out of the barn. They tumbled onto the grass, coughing violently, their bodies trembling from the smoke, heat, and exertion. Emily lay on the ground, panting, tears streaming down her soot-streaked face. She looked at Jake, who was kneeling beside her, his face covered in sweat and blackened dust. Relief flooded through her in waves. She had survived. She had been saved. And the man beside her, strong and fearless, had risked everything to make sure she lived. She could barely speak, her voice broken from coughing, but she managed. Thank you." Jake helped her sit up, keeping his arm around her shoulders to steady her. He glanced back at the barn, now a mass of flames and smoke, the old wooden walls collapsing under the fire's intensity. Sparks flew into the air, carried by the wind, and small sections of burning hay shot skyward. Despite the destruction, Jake felt a quiet relief. The barn could be rebuilt, the animals were safe, and most importantly, Emily was alive. Neighbors were beginning to gather, drawn by the sight of smoke and the sound of shouting. Some had already called the fire department, while others rushed to bring buckets of water, blankets, and anything that might help. Jake kept a careful eye on Emily, brushing soot from her hair and checking her arms and legs for injuries. She shivered from shock, exhaustion, and smoke inhalation, but she was otherwise unharmed. Emily looked back at the barn, her chest heaving, her heart still pounding from the fear she had felt. The structure that had been a part of her life, filled with memories and family history, was now a blazing inferno. It was heartbreaking, but she couldn't dwell on it. She was alive. She had someone to thank, someone who had risked everything to save her. And as she sat on the grass, leaning against Jake, she felt a strange mix of grief and gratitude. The fire continued to roar behind them, consuming every inch of the barn. Flames shot high into the sky, a powerful reminder of the danger they had faced. But Emily felt safe for the first time in what felt like hours. She could hear Jake's calm voice, steady and reassuring, telling her to breathe, to rest, to recover. His presence grounded her, giving her the strength to calm her trembling body. I thought I was done," Emily whispered, still catching her breath, her voice weak. "I didn't think anyone would get to me in time." Jake shook his head, his expression serious but gentle. "You're safe now, that's what matters." "I wasn't going to let anything happen to you." His voice carried a quiet strength, the kind of confidence that made Emily feel protected. She leaned against him, letting herself relax slightly, knowing that he had her back. The fire department arrived soon after, their trucks roaring onto the property, hoses snaking toward the barn. Firefighters worked quickly, dousing the remaining flames and preventing the fire from spreading to nearby fields. Emily and Jake watched, exhausted but safe, as the barn slowly succumbed to the water and the fire's fury. Smoke and ash rose into the sky, a reminder of how close danger had come, but also a symbol of survival and resilience. Emily finally allowed herself to cry, tears of relief and fear mingling with soot and sweat. Jake stayed beside her, offering silent support, letting her process the shock. She realized that courage wasn't just about facing danger, it was about surviving it, about trusting someone else to help when you needed it most. Jake had given her that courage, and she would never forget it. As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden light across the field, Emily stood shakily, brushing ash from her clothes. The barn was gone, but she was alive. The animals were safe. And the man who had saved her stood beside her, exhausted but smiling faintly, a quiet hero who had risked everything to ensure she lived. The barn smoldered in the late afternoon light, smoke rising in thick gray clouds that drifted lazily across the fields. Firefighters had done their job, extinguishing the flames and ensuring that the fire did not spread to the surrounding pastures. The Harper farm had escaped total disaster, but the barn, the heart of the property, was now a charred skeleton of what it had once been. Emily Harper sat on the grass a few yards away, still covered in soot, her clothes singed, and her hands shaking from the ordeal. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the clean, cool air outside the barn, and tried to make sense of everything that had happened. The fear, the panic, the suffocating smoke, it all felt like a nightmare she had barely escaped. Her mind wandered to the past, to the countless hours she had spent in that barn, to the memories of her childhood, the summers she had spent climbing hay bales, laughing with friends, helping her parents repair fences and care for the animals. All of that had been threatened in a single, terrifying moment. Jake Lawson sat beside her, his arm resting lightly on her shoulders. His face was still streaked with soot, his clothes dusty and worn from the struggle, but there was a calmness in his eyes that reassured her. He didn't say much, letting Emily process the events in her own time. Instead, he simply stayed close, a steady presence in the midst of the chaos. She looked at him and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Without him, she wouldn't have made it out alive. Neighbors and friends began arriving, drawn by the smoke and the sound of emergency sirens. Some came with blankets and bottles of water, others with words of comfort and concern. They gathered at a safe distance, watching as firefighters cleaned up the last embers and made sure the barn was no longer a threat. Emily recognized several of them, people she had grown up with, neighbors she had known all her life. They approached cautiously, offering hugs, gentle touches on the arm, and words of reassurance. "Emily, are you okay?" asked Mrs. Thompson, an elderly neighbor who had watched Emily grow up. Her eyes were filled with worry, but relief softened her expression. "You're safe now, that's all that matters." Emily nodded, still gasping slightly from the smoke, and whispered, I'm okay now, thanks to Jake." Her gaze shifted toward him, and he gave a small, humble nod. He had risked everything to save her, and she felt a deep, unspoken bond forming between them. The animals were unharmed, having been safely moved to other parts of the farm before the fire had spread. Emily checked on them, patting the horses and feeding the cows, tears mingling with relief. Their safety was a small but significant comfort in the aftermath of the chaos. She realized that life could continue, that the farm could survive, and that she could rebuild not only the barn but also the sense of normalcy that had been threatened. Over the next few days, the Harper family, neighbors, and volunteers began the process of cleaning up the barn's remains. The charred wood was removed, ashes were shoveled into piles, and the ground was leveled in preparation for reconstruction. Emily and Jake worked side by side, hauling debris, clearing space, and planning how to rebuild. There was a quiet satisfaction in the physical labor, a sense that with effort and determination they could restore what had been lost. During breaks, Emily and Jake would sit on the grass, sharing water and quiet conversation. They spoke about the fire, about the moments that had terrified them, and about the relief of surviving. Jake spoke calmly, his words measured and reassuring, while Emily shared her thoughts and fears with an honesty that only someone who had faced true danger could express. Each moment of conversation, each shared laugh or sigh of relief, brought them closer together. Emily realized something important during those conversations. Courage wasn't just about facing danger. It was about trusting someone else, about letting them help you when you needed it most. Jake had given her that trust, and in doing so, he had also given her a new sense of strength. She felt a bond forming, a quiet connection built on shared experience, gratitude, and respect. As the sun rose on the following morning, Emily walked through the remains of the barn, taking in the blackened beams and charred hay. The smell of smoke lingered in the air, a constant reminder of the danger they had faced. Yet there was also hope. Plans for rebuilding were already underway. Jake had sketched out ideas for a stronger, safer structure, one that could withstand fire and the elements more effectively. Emily listened carefully, offering suggestions based on her experience, and together they planned a barn that would be functional, safe, and beautiful. The town of Willow Creek had not forgotten their story. Word of the rescue spread quickly, neighbors sharing the tale of bravery and determination. People spoke of Jake's courage, Emily's resilience, and the way they had worked together to survive. The story became a reminder to the community of the strength of human connection, the importance of helping one another, and the value of bravery in the face of danger. Emily found herself thinking often about that day, about the fear, the struggle, and the relief of being saved. She realized that while the barn had been destroyed, something else had been created in its place. A bond, a sense of trust, and a deep understanding of what truly mattered. She felt gratitude not only for her survival, but also for the lessons she had learned about courage, hope, and the power of human kindness. As the weeks passed, the rebuilding of the barn began in earnest. Jake and Emily worked tirelessly, alongside neighbors and family, hammering beams, raising walls, and painting fresh wood. Each nail, each plank was a symbol of resilience, of moving forward despite what had been lost. Emily found herself smiling more often, laughing with Jake as they worked, and feeling a sense of purpose and accomplishment that went beyond simple survival. During one particularly quiet evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emily and Jake stood on the farm, surveying the progress they had made. The new barn was taking shape, stronger and brighter than the old one. Emily felt a sense of pride and relief. They had survived the fire, saved what mattered most, and were rebuilding not just a structure, but a life filled with hope and determination. Jake looked at her and smiled gently. "You did amazing, Emily. You stayed strong when it mattered most." Emily returned the smile, feeling a warmth in her chest. "We did it together," she replied. The truth of her words resonated deeply. Their shared experience had created a bond that would not easily be broken, a connection forged in adversity and trust. As the barn neared completion, Emily realized that life had changed in more ways than one. She had survived a terrifying ordeal, learned the value of courage and perseverance, and discovered a deep appreciation for the people who stood by her in the most difficult moments. She had also discovered something unexpected, a sense of closeness and connection with Jake that went beyond friendship. The barn stood complete at last, a new symbol of resilience and hope. Its wooden beams gleamed in the sunlight, freshly painted and sturdy, ready to shelter the animals and equipment for generations to come. Emily walked through it, running her hands over the smooth wood, and felt a sense of accomplishment and peace. The fire had taken the old structure, but it had not taken her spirit. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Jake stood nearby, leaning against a post, watching her with a quiet pride. "It's perfect," he said simply, a statement that carried more weight than words could convey. Emily nodded, smiling softly, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. They had faced fear together, survived, and created something lasting in its place. In the months that followed, life returned to a rhythm on the Harper farm. Animals were fed, fields tended, fences repaired, and the barn stood as a symbol of resilience. Emily and Jake continued to work closely together, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They laughed, shared stories, and supported one another, their friendship deepening into something lasting and meaningful. The memory of the fire never left Emily completely, but it no longer haunted her. Instead, it became a story of survival, courage, and connection. A reminder that even in the face of danger, hope and human kindness could prevail. She knew that the experience had changed her forever, making her stronger, braver, and more aware of the people she could rely on when life became difficult. One afternoon, as Emily tended to the horses and Jake worked on repairs in the barn, she paused and looked around. The fields were bright with sunlight, the barn stood tall and proud, and the animals were safe. She felt a sense of peace and gratitude she had never experienced before. Life had been tested, and she had survived. Together they had faced fear, and together they had triumphed. Emily looked at Jake, feeling a warmth in her chest. "I'm glad you were here," she said softly. Jake smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm glad too," he replied. "We made it through together." And as the sun set over the fields of Willow Creek, casting golden light over the barn, the farm, and the two of them, Emily felt a deep sense of hope. The fire had been terrifying, but it had also brought clarity. She had survived, she had learned, and she had found someone she could trust. Life on the farm would continue, filled with hard work, laughter, and the quiet courage that comes from knowing that, even in the darkest moments, there is always hope.